Okay, now, yeah, great.
All right. Okay, we're back with Carol. So Carol, how do you see riders and horses as individuals? And can you give some examples of why it's important to understand and treat every single horse as an individual? Maybe I'll throw in some questions throughout this, but I'm curious what your points are on that.
So just like people, we're all built differently. We're all stronger in some areas and not so strong in other areas. And, you look at the people who are great basketball players. They're all really, really tall. But it doesn't mean that short people can't play basketball. They can, and they can get really good at it, but they might not be good enough to be on the world stage. But it doesn't mean that they can't be really good at it. And it's in every activity. So horses are the same muscularly and skeletally. Biomechanically, horses are horses. Sure, some horses, it's easier for them to do certain things, and they have an aptitude, psychological aptitude to do it, like a racehorse. Thoroughbreds love to run, and they run faster than most other horses. So it's, the thing about training, whether you're training a horse to, to be a high-level dressage horse, or you're training a horse to be a high-level jumper, dressage is not about making a dressage horse. So let me go back a little bit. Everybody, you'll hear often, horses are not made for dressage, but dressage is for every horse. What does that mean?
Yeah, dressage, everyone says it, but
yeah, what does it mean? So, the word dressage is the French word for training. That's all it means, training. So it has become a discipline of competition. And, but it's really about training. So when we are training or using a dressage philosophy about it, in order to train our horses, what does that mean? What are we doing? It is a progressive, meaning step by step, ABC process of educating a horse's understanding of the language of the aids, how we use our body, our reins, our legs, our seat, our position to communicate with him. It's a progressive process of developing his muscles in a healthy way, in a way that will prolong his useful life, not use him up. So in a way, we can look at a lot of competitive sports today and see how ice skaters, gymnasts, they're only on the world stage from like age 14 to 17, then they're gone. We rarely anymore see 25, 30-year-old gymnasts or ice skaters because they're used up. Same with football players. They're old at 35. And dressage ought to prolong the life of a horse, the useful, productive, working life of a horse into his 30s. So if he's lucky enough to live that long, because we all know horses are fragile, but what we do, how we ride him and how we train him ought not to break down his body. It ought to make it stronger and better. And that is really, dressage is about developing balance and building muscle. And so that the horse really, really, when it comes down to the simplest thing, my responsibility to every horse I sit on is to make it as easy as possible for him to carry me around, because it's not easy to carry me around. And we could compare it to putting a toddler on the shoulders of a very advanced ballerina.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, she would have to change the way she carries herself in order to cope with this unbalancing effect of this weight on her shoulders. She'd have to learn how to use her body differently. That's what dressage is. It's to help the horse educate his mind to the language of the aids and to help develop the straightness and the strength and the balance to carry a rider.
And
so it's not about doing piaffe, passage, and flying changes every stride. I mean, that's fun, and every horse can do it. Every horse was born being able to do it. When you think about it, every single horse ever born, on the first day, it galloped out into the field with its mother. It piaffed, it passaged, it did flying changes, it did half-pass pirouettes, everything. We don't teach them how to do anything. We try to not disrupt their freedom to do it. And we try to guide their balance and their strength in a way that makes it easy for them to do it when we ask for it, not just randomly any old time.
Yeah. And I
mean, because dressage is training, every time you sit on your horse, you're doing dressage because you are training your horse well or not so well, right. In a good way or a not good way, so in a way it's people are taking the discipline of competitive dressage and saying, I don't do that. And that's great. That's totally fine. But when one understands the biomechanics and a progressive developmental process of educating the horse, you give a horse calmness because they become confident in knowing what's expected of them, number one. Number two, you don't ask them to do things when they're in a balance from which they can't do it. So they calm down because they begin to trust you. There are so many things. You develop their strength more and more and more. I have a student who gave a presentation at the backcountry horseman big meeting one year, saying she didn't want to do dressage because that's not what she does. She likes to go on these long trail rides. And but she decided, okay, I'm going to take some lessons. And after 1 year, a horse of hers, a thoroughbred, who could not make it to the top of this one mountain that she loved to do, after 1 year, he just went up really easily. It was so easy for him. And when he got there, after this long day of riding, basically uphill the whole day, he was fitter than he'd ever been. He was not stressed. He was calm and relaxed. Whereas every year before, when she'd gone on this long trail ride, he'd never made it to the top because he started getting antsy and fidgety and worried, and it was too much for him physically. So, when I see dressage, like you mentioned, working equitation, there is the dressage phase in working equitation. And when I was in Portugal, it was called Portuguese equitation because that's where it started. And it wasn't called working equitation. And so when it suddenly became popular in the US and changed the name to working equitation, and it opened the doors to all the different disciplines, Western, hunt seat, English, I'm sure even a saddle seat rider would be welcomed in. It's a wonderful thing. And it's interesting. And it's interesting for the horses. But the dressage phase always just makes me laugh because people treat it like they treat a pattern that they and the horse have to memorize. Instead of understanding a dressage test, the reason it's called a test and not a pattern is because it is testing the horse's training to that point, his meaning, the ability for the horse to move fluidly from one movement to another movement, without the loss of his balance, without the loss of his relaxation. So it's all about free forward movement. And instead, we see people focusing on whether or not the horse's neck is round. That has nothing to do with anything. That's a result of the horse being in balance, moving in freedom, being in self-carriage. But it's not the way to get there.
Yeah.
And so I've often been teaching people from different disciplines who say, well, my horse knows how to do that thing. And I say, okay, he might understand how to do it, but right now you've unintentionally put him in a balance from which he can't do it. It would be like taking a one-legged man to a butt kicking contest. It's not possible because he only has one leg and he's standing on it. He can't possibly kick himself in the rear end with that one leg he's standing on. So it sounds ridiculous, I know that, but when we're riding, very often we don't realize that we are putting the horse out of balance. He's crooked, heavier on one side than the other side, and there's tension in the muscles in his body, and we're wondering why he won't bend, why he won't turn, why he is faster this way and slower that way.
Yeah.
And so that's a lack of understanding of what dressage is about.
Yeah.
It's about helping him carry himself upright, straight, taking the tension away.
Yeah. So there's benefit to all breeds and to all disciplines. I just think is so foundational. And I think that people are intimidated because you're right. They're picturing competitive dressage.
Right.
It's just not that. It's just not that.
No, exactly.
So can you give me an example of, I want to try to keep this topic to individual horses or individual conformations and individual riders, but can you kind of just give me some examples maybe throughout your years or anything that stands out? Like, let's just say you had a student riding a thoroughbred that was different, that you had to treat differently than maybe a horse that's, I know you have your warm bloods and you have your Iberian horses, which to me are on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And I one thing that kind of irks me is when I see Iberians ridden like
warm bloods. Yes.
And it just destroys the beauty of their natural movement and how they're designed to move. But I don't know. Do you have anything to expound on and kind of that little question there?
Sure. So, I'll just quickly touch on the Iberian thing because that's very close to my heart. And they've suddenly become popular. When I was competing, my Spanish horses, I was the only one, and people would look at me from the distance like, what are you? Who are you? And I had many people come up to me often at competitions and say, what kind of horse is that? I've never seen a horse like that. And I thought, wow, you haven't? Look at any of the old paintings, there they are. But so that's a sad thing because people who are riding warm bloods the way most people are training and riding warm bloods today would do better if they rode them the way they ought to be riding the Iberian horses. So the Iberian horses need a longer, slower process to develop the strength to do some of the suspended movements that the warm bloods are born doing.
Yeah.
The big difference is not that the warm bloods are better. That's a word that has taken out of my vocabulary.
Yeah.
They move, that suspension in a warm blood comes from a tendinous ligamentous tension in the joints. So when they hit the ground, they tense their joints. Sorry, a bee just landed on my hand. They tense their joints and sort of pogo stick off them. So that doesn't require muscle. That requires tension in the joint. So that's why you see, a day-old warm blood foals or young warm blood foals who have amazing suspension.
Yeah.
Whereas an Iberian horse when they hit the ground, they flex the joints. So to push themselves back up, that needs muscular strength. So it takes longer to develop that to the same degree where you get suspension. But when you finally do, you have a very soft suspension. So a passage in an Iberian horse is very soft and comfortable to ride. And it doesn't take as much out of them as a passage in a warm blood if they are ridden into that passage by compression, which is what's the most common thing. But I will talk about one horse in particular who really touched my heart over the years, was an 18 one-hand Shire. And his head was longer than my body. He was the most precious soul. And I mean, he wore size 5.5 or 6 shoe.
Wow.
His dinner plates for feet.
The big
and
horse.
Oh my gosh, he was amazing. But through a very progressive, gentle development, this horse had the very best piaffe still that I have ever seen to this day. And he could passage, and he could do the most amazing canter pirouettes, but he would never be able to do a medium or extended trot because that was too much. People misunderstand, sort of what a horse is doing in different gaits. So this is a horse who could collect till, all the way to Canada, and it wouldn't have been difficult for him after strengthening him. Yeah. But extension means he had to extend his head and neck, and his head, most horses' head weighs 50 pounds. His probably weighed 75.
Yeah.
That's a sack and a half of grain out there on the end of his long neck. And to extend that out in front of him and be able to extend his stride was too much. So, here he could do so much with that amazingly huge body. And, those feet, it was like trying to dance ballet in ski boots.
Right.
But he was a ballerina in collection. And so he was a great example of helping a horse develop the best of what he could do in the conformation and what he had.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, just biomechanically, if you're the leverage for him to pick up his head at that point with that much strength, it'd be easy for his hind end to do that collection because it's here. But to lengthen and have that head, where's the leverage on that? So to extend, you would be on your forehand and not be able to
this is the thing. People misunderstand extension and medium and lengthening.
Yeah.
When a horse extends the neck and extends the stride, he is on the forehand. I don't care what anyone says. He has just put all this weight out there. So in order to maintain his balance, he must lengthen the stride to keep up with the momentum that head and neck have created. And this is why in a classical tradition, we always create balance before forward rather than the modern, kind of way of looking at it, which is to go forward until the horse stumbles onto his balance. And sometimes they don't, especially, and this is where people go wrong with the Iberian horses too, not just the Iberian horses, quarter horses, Morgans, all kinds of horses. When they push them for too much forward before they've developed balance and their competence in a slower, shorter stride. And when the horses are being pushed for something bigger and faster than their natural tempo, they lose their confidence. They stop wanting to go forward. Most horses who are so-called behind the leg or not forward or lazy is because we haven't balanced them first. So this is where dressage helps everybody.
Awesome. Well, that leads us actually into our next topic. So I'm going to let's end this topic here and we will go into the topic of balance. So let me stop it and then we'll hit record again.